Nkechi Obonna, BBC News, Lagos.
Now, earlier, I spoke to Teniola, an economic policy advisor. I began by asking her to elaborate which sectors in Africa are the worst hit by the US aid cuts.
Well, one thing to remember about the USAID is that it was not only funding itself as an agency, but there were a lot of other development agencies that were reliant on it for funding. So one of the most immediate effects we have seen is the job losses, particularly in the healthcare sector. So you have African health workers that were working for USAID, but also other reliant agencies that have lost their jobs. And of course, it's going to have an effect on incomes. We have some countries that have been particularly dependent on USAID funding. So you have, for example, the DRC, which is currently even facing a conflict. You have Ethiopia, you have Liberia. And with these countries, a large part of their development assistance was coming from USAID, and there may be some effects that may even trickle down up until their gross national income. So this may be quite a shock to some countries. And I mean, again, when you look at the assistance, it's been about healthcare, it's been about humanitarian support, but also about development support. And all of these sectors will see a significant impact as far as the withdrawal of the funding goes.
What are some of the strategies that African governments can now use to plug these deficits in the short term and in the long term as well?
I'd like to point out, first of all, that a lot of African governments are facing a fiscal crisis, so they're not able to generate enough or sufficient revenue nationally or domestically to match their development needs. Of course, we also have a growing population in most countries in Africa. But the thing that we need to do at the moment is to get better at the allocation of the resources that we do generate, because we've not been great at that. We need to get better at what we spend money on, what we target with our national funds, even as we look to generating more funds domestically. And generating more funds domestically, of course, people will talk about taxes, but we know that in many countries, again, citizens are already facing an undue burden because of the cost of living crisis, because of inflationary pressures. So first get better at resource allocation, and then start to explore ways to generate more resources domestically. Of course, finding ways to also partner with the private sector, and finally putting some action to the conversations that has gone around about better involvement of the private sector in development in Africa.
There have been discussions around whether enough of African budgets are dedicated or allocated to healthcare. Is it time to relook at some of those allocations now with this in mind?
We've been having these conversations for years, and now I think we're at a critical point. Again, I'd like to point out that the funding withdrawal from the USAID is actually just the latest out of a trend of other funding cuts. I did some analysis last year where even from the EU level, from the Canada level, and even from the UK, development funding really has been going down, from Germany as well, from the GIZ. And this is because there are a lot of other issues that the European nations and now even the US feel like they want to pay attention to.
For those who are hoping that other larger economies would come in and sort of fill the gap or vacuum left by the United States, are we likely to see other nations stepping in to sort of help supplement some of these health budgets in Africa and Asia, or is that not the reality?
But the fact is that for a while now, there's been a discussion, which African leaders were also part of, about moving from aid to investment, or from aid to trade. So we have also been, pushing that narrative that we don't want aid, we want investment, we want trade. And some countries and regions have started to take that direction. For example, from the EU level, they developed this instrument called the Global Gateway, which is supposed to be about investment. And for example, from the China level, it's always been more about investment than it's been about aid. And China is the next great big power. I really hope that we're not looking to other developing nations like India to begin to close our healthcare financing gaps. I would hope that is not the case. It's really about how to begin to step into that position ourselves. Within the limits that we're able to.